in this Busting Indy Myth number 26, we're going to address the SNP claim that the Union is not a union of equals. Now, this is a strange complaint to hear from the Scottish National Party, because the immediate implication is that somehow they'd be happy if it were a union of equals. And so we then have to ask, well, why are they not doing anything to help make it a union of equals? Or are they just happy to complain about it not being a union of equals? And would they be happy if it were a union of equals? Of course they wouldn't be happy if it were a union of equals. They don't even want such a thing in the first place. So it is a little bit of a cheek for them to complain that one's apparently not a union of equals when they don't even want us to be a union of equals in the first place, right? So there's that. However, they do put it about a lot, and it does have a certain traction, because we all want to think that Scotland is England's equal, right? Whatever that's meant to mean. And let's look at that for a moment. But firstly, what got them coming up with this phrase? What got them started on this phrase? And it was born out of their frustration that the SNP was winning elections on an alleged mandate to have a referendum, but was not getting allowed to have a referendum. In other words, it was born of their inability to understand what devolution is and what the limits of devolution within a United Kingdom are. Because its limits, the limits of devolution, do require that the SNP is not able to get its way all the time, because there happen to be other countries and other people in this United Kingdom whose interests have to be considered. Okay, but nevertheless, the SNP continued to think that devolution was all about just allowing the SNP to get its way all the time, which is not about at all. And when they found out that the SNP couldn't get its way all the time, then they started saying that we're not in a union of equals, because we can't get our way all the time. In other words, they didn't understand even the union that they were in or the nature of devolution. So at the root of this complaint that we're not a union of equals is an inability or unwillingness to understand the constitutional point and limits of devolution. That's it, basically. An unwillingness or inability to understand that Holyrood is a devolved arm of the British Parliament, and it sits within the overall British state, whose central parliament at Westminster is a parliament for all parts of the United Kingdom, and has a duty and responsibility to keep the United Kingdom together on behalf of all parts of the United Kingdom, and on behalf of all parts of the United Kingdom and all people that want it to be kept together. That's the job of Westminster. And so long as we're within a United Kingdom, then it's Westminster's right in order to do that. But no, they somehow believe that it's all about simply just allowing the SNP to get whatever it wants because it happens to have a majority of seats or votes at a Scottish or British election. Well, no, it's not about that at all. Devolution is about strengthening the union, allegedly, and about bringing government closer to the people. That was what it was established to do, all within the context of a United Kingdom. We need to get back to understanding what devolution was intended to be, rightly or wrongly. So the complaint that the UK is not a union of equals is born of a complete misunderstanding of what devolution is. That's the first thing that we need to look at. But the second thing we need to look at is like what's meant by that anyway. Because what do you mean when you talk about equal? What are you meaning here? You know, and that's important, because otherwise, if we don't understand what we're meaning about things, then we don't know what we're agreeing with or what we're against. And so our answers can be misrepresented to imply things that we were not considering at the time. I mean, when we talk about equality between Scotland and England, are we speaking about Scotland as a country being equal to England as a country? In which case, what are we comparing in Scotland versus England? And what measurements are we using? Are we comparing the population, the relative resources available, the size of the economy? Because clearly in those regards we might be equal in some respects and unequal in others. For example, some people would say that there was inequality between Scotland and England regarding our oil resources, Scotland having more oil resources than England. That's an inequality. So you could say Scotland and England are not equal in that, because Scotland's actually got more. That's one way of thinking about it, isn't it? Or are you talking about parliaments being equal? Are you talking about Holyrood being equal with Westminster? Because if you're thinking that's the case, then you're completely wrong. There is no equality there. And there never was meant to be. Or are you talking about the unequal union in the sense that Scotland is advantaged in the union by having two parliaments, by having Holyrood and Westminster, in a way that is unfair, some might say, to the English? Are you talking about that, Mr. SNP? Are you talking about that constitutional unfairness? No, I don't think you are. Okay? So what are you actually talking about when you talk about equal? Well, what we hear when you're talking about Scotland is not in a union of equals. What we're hearing is that you just don't like the fact that Scotland's not getting its way all the time. That's what we're hearing over all the noise. And in response to that, we try to get back to basics, and rather than addressing your particular matter, which we don't necessarily even agree with the basic terms that we might each be using, instead of getting drawn down into that, we prefer simply to state our frame. And our frame is that we are in a union. And what is the point of the union? The point of the union, or any union, is to join together so that we may enjoy the benefits of association which accrue from working together, in order that we can become greater than the sum of our parts, so that we can achieve benefits and advantages and consequences which cannot be achieved by working apart or working alone, so that together we can become stronger, more secure, and more successful. And that's our idea of what a union represents. And to that end, we encourage people to put personal interests aside and concentrate on the common good. And that's the union ideal that we campaign for. So we're not going to get wrapped up in the SNP definitions of what constitutes equal and unequal between Scotland and England. We're simply going to state our frame, being greater than the sum of our parts. That's our frame. That's the Unionist frame. That's the frame upon which we campaign. And you know what? I was looking this up today. There's a word for that. It's called synergy. And the definition of synergy is the combined power of a group of things when they are working together that is greater than the total power achieved by each working separately. That's our ideal. Union synergy. And just to conclude, you know, and I mentioned this at the start, the Scottish nationalists, when they complain about there not being a union of equals, they're not approaching this in good faith, because they're not coming to the table believing in a union in the first place. And if they truly believed in a union of equals, they'd be trying to make it work instead of constantly campaigning against it. And so for them, it's just a rhetorical device, another rhetorical device to try to attack unionists, to try to put us on the back foot, and to try to make us somehow feel ashamed of what they're claiming are some kind of foundational principles of the United Kingdom. So they're only using the union of equals phrase as a rhetorical device to break up the UK. So a straw man argument that they're building up to break down. So let's conclude. The union ideal, okay, is that the union's about working together, about one for all and all for one. So that ultimately, in the Latin phrase, vis unita fortior, in union, strength is yet stronger. And that's the motto of the Union Bridge, which connects Scotland and England over the Tweed. A union of teams working together for the greater good, a union of joint endeavour, a union of purpose, a union of progress based on a union of affinity. Okay, that's our ideal, and we'd love to be able to articulate that to those SNP MPs and MSPs who constantly complain about somehow not being involved in a union of equals. So I'd say to them, join with us and let's pool our strengths and resources to make life better for everyone throughout our islands. And here endeth Busting Indy Myths, part 26.